Welcome to Tour Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton,
And I'm Robin.
and this is a new episode of Bread Crumbs. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I don't know
Yeah.
why it's been so
Well,
long.
it's been a busy summer. Today's
Yeah.
the 1st of September, and our travels and are over for the moment, and having family in from out of town. But anyways, it's good to be back here and,
It
and
is.
talking about things that matter to us.
Well, we're hoping that this discussion is something that matters to the Father. And it seems
Yes.
like in this walk of faith that when God brings the same subject around before our eyes and into our awareness, he's trying to get our attention.
Yeah.
And that has happened recently with us.
Yeah, because you were reading a book and you
Yes.
came across something, shared it with me, and I said, I've just been
Right.
thinking about the same thing.
And then
So,
I heard several teachings that emphasize the same thing. So what is it we're talking about today, Grant?
the only three relationships that matter. Mm-hmm. And you found it in a book about the Sabbath. Give us the title and the author of that book, Robin.
Well, I've shared this book with a lot of friends, and it's called Sabbath, A Day to Create Yourself. And it's by Rabbi Warren Goldstein. And he opens one of the beautiful chapters where he describes the value of Sabbath, the
And
essence.
what's the name of the chapter?
The name of the chapter is Nurture Your Relationships, because that is something that the Sabbath gives us an opportunity to do.
Yes.
And it's one of the primary reasons that we gather and we observe. And here's the opening paragraph from this chapter that I loved. It says, thriving, loving relationships are a vital ingredient for happiness. We have three essential relationships: with God, with the people in our lives, and with ourselves. These relationships are the core of our identity, and when we nurture them, the source of our deepest happiness.
Now, what are those three again?
Our relationship with God, with the people that are in our life, because he assigns people to
Oh,
us.
yes, absolutely.
And with ourselves. That's kind of a new
That
idea.
sounds a little strange when you
It
first read
does,
it.
but it shouldn't.
No.
It shouldn't. I recently heard a teaching that Keisha Gallagher shared. Hi, Keisha. She's one of my favorite teachers as well. And she opened this gathering with a Torah community. And she said, how many of you in this room, and there were hundreds, have challenging relationships or trouble with relationships? And everybody raised their hand. And she says, but here's the thing. There's nothing else that really matters.
That's right.
And she said, she quoted another gentleman that she's learned from who states that every verse from Genesis to Revelation addresses one of these three areas.
That's so true. I really believe that. No question.
And when you return to that truth, it helps carve away the stuff that distracts us from the thing that can really make
Yes.
life happy and fulfilling and give us something to take into eternity.
Right.
Right?
So true. Well, the only things you can take with you are your relationships.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that struck me, we discussed it a little bit this past week, is that we tend to take these one at a time. We think, okay, what's my relationship with God like? And we could score it like on a 1 to 10. Mm-hmm. Then what's my relationship with other people like? Well, it kind of depends on the person, but we could score those on a scale of 1 to 10. Mm-hmm. Then what's my relationship with myself like? In other words, am I really in tune with my own flaws, my own temptations, those things?
Am I
Am
I aware of my own soul?
Yeah. Or
really?
we could score that on 1 to 10. But as we thought about and discussed it, it's almost as if all three of these are always going to have the same score.
If we're honest.
If we're honest, because they're all going to be 10s, or they're all going to be 9s or 8s or 7s, or they're all going to be way down at 1s. They're all going to be pretty much the same.
Well, you know what we tell ourselves, Grant? We tell ourselves, I can work on my relationship with God, and I'm just not a people person, so I can just kind of put that aside and not work on that because I'm a loner. Mm-hmm. And as far as my relationship with myself, I don't even understand that, so I'm not even going to address it.
Yeah, that's the natural.
That's what we
inclination.
do.
But what does Yeshua say? He was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he gave 2 commandments. Mm-hmm. To love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Why did he give 2? Because you can only do one to the degree you do the other.
And it's interesting that all three are included in those two statements.
That's correct.
Because he alludes to the relationship we have with ourselves,
That's right.
assuming that we understand it enough to make that a basis for how we treat others.
That's right.
It's fascinating.
It is. Now, we have to throw out one caveat here. When it comes to relationship with others, I mean, we can look at Yeshua, and was his relationship with everybody great?
Peaceful? Was it
No,
peaceful?
No. I mean, after all, he was crucified because he was so hated and reviled by some. So when it comes to relationship with others, the way we have to grade that is not, do I have any enemies or not, but how accessible am I to others? Mm-hmm. There are some people who are going to hate you because you love God, and some people love you because you hate God, or because you hate the things they hate or hate the people they hate. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to relationship with others, it's like, how accessible am I to them? How open am I to having a relationship with them? But there are some people who are toxic and poisonous, and we're commanded not to have a relationship with them. Mm-hmm. But with those people we can have relationships with, how healthy are they? How selfless are they?
I'm going to take it another step because I try to do a self-check, Grant. The people in my life, even those, I would say especially those with whom it's not possible at this moment to walk shoulder to shoulder the same direction with due to a number of different things, have I forgiven them? Mm-hmm. Or do I have unforgiveness in my heart toward them?
Right.
And that is the self-check.
That is. What is there anything on my side of the ledger that is a wall between me and them? And
when I hold them up, we talked here on Bread Crumbs not too long ago about the concept of praying without words. Mm-hmm. And I regularly will hold people up in my heart, picture their face, picture their voice. Yeah. Is there an element of anger, unforgiveness? That is what puts a barrier up between us and our own Father in heaven, us and ourself, and us and that person. Mm-hmm. Grant, I know a person recently who exercised this in relationship with their son who lives on the other side of the country, and they haven't spoken to him in years. His choice. Mm-hmm. The son's choice. Mm-hmm. Right. And so she began to just pray daily over and over again by holding this beloved son of hers in her heart, even though he had hurt her, he had distanced himself from her. And after 2 weeks of doing this and carefully making sure that there was nothing in her own heart that she was holding against him, he contacted her out of the blue.
Isn't that something?
Something happens in the supernatural world when we are willing to confront any unforgiveness. Messiah says that is the only unforgivable sin.
Unforgiveness.
Right.
Well, it's funny you bring up that example because I was just thinking of the father of the prodigal son.
Right.
So they split ways, and the father had all kinds of reasons to be bitter towards his son for his bad behavior, his selfishness, his arrogance, his wastefulness. He had all kinds of things he could be angry at his son for. And the son assumed that the father would be.
So on the son's side, there was no relationship. But on the father's side,
he was there watching for him every day.
Yes.
And the son thought, if my father will just let me be one of the servants and I could just be a servant to him and just get slave wages. But what did the father do when he saw him? He ran out, embraced him. My son was dead and now he's alive. And he killed the fatted calf, put a robe on him. He just treated him like he had never done anything wrong. Mm-hmm. And that has to be our attitude towards people who hurt us.
It does. And it's not an easy thing, but it's essential in order to maintain the other two.
Yeah. And there was nothing the father could do to restore the relationship. It was all dependent on the son's change of heart.
Sometimes waiting, lovingly waiting, is the most brave and courageous and forgiving thing we can do toward another person.
That's what God does towards us.
Thank goodness. Yeah. Twersky said something that I really appreciate. He said, "Nowhere is man put more to the test of becoming spiritual than in the area of unforgiveness.
So true.
It's everything.
Yeah.
And you were sharing a quote with me recently, Grant, that describes the tragedy of our falling short of the person that we can
Yes.
become.
Right.
Can you share that?
Yeah, it's an anonymous quote that I found in a book, but it gives a definition for hell. And this is what it describes hell. When the person you became meets the person you could have been.
Oh.
And on Judgment Day, that is what's going to happen. Each of us, the person we became, is going to encounter and see the person we could have become. And that's going to be so painful for us to see, oh, I could have been that.
It's so sobering.
Yeah.
So we can't skip over this issue of relationships thinking that we can draw close to God. It's everything.
It is.
We have to return
Right.
to it. We have to give our attention to it. And that is the thing that Messiah emphasizes. It's the thing that the Word
Right.
emphasizes. And it's the thing that needs to occupy our
Yes.
thoughts and our prayers.
So whether you meant to or not, or realized you were or not, as you talked about relationship with others, you are really describing a person's relationship with himself. Are we able to look at ourselves and see, I have unforgiveness in my heart. I need to fix that because I am not a whole person. I'm disjointed in my soul. I'm double-souled because I'm harboring something that God hates. And can I deal with that within myself?
Being double-souled, that is a key phrase. I'm just starting a study with some good friends in the book of James. And James talks about how dangerous it is to be unstable or double-souled. You're like something tossed in the waves,
Totally
driven by the
unstable.
wind, totally unstable. So what our goal is to have wholeness in ourselves. And years ago, you shared something with me, and at the time it didn't make sense. But as time has gone by, I've come to understand it more, and I'd like to share it with our listeners because it helps me kind of self-check. And what this truth is that spiritual maturity will be characterized by self-composure.
Self-composure.
And at the time, I thought, well, it's possible for a person who's disconnected with God to walk around with composure. But you see, I didn't understand the difference between composure and even what people can embrace as like a pride. And
Or indifference.
or indifference, or a stubbornness in with their chin up and their shoulders back, just disregarding others. That is not composure.
No.
And so then the question comes to my mind: well, what marks composure? What is that truly? And you know what I think? I think it's when we know the truth.
Yes.
We know the truth and we dwell in the truth. We hold on to the truth and we're able to dismiss all the lies that are telling us to compare ourselves to others, because comparison is a death knell.
Yeah.
And it's telling us that others aren't worth our time, that they can be dismissed,
Yeah.
because we must never dismiss. Our
course.
master never dismissed
Never,
anyone.
never.
And that we're not worthy of our Father's love.
Right.
Those are lies.
Yeah. And so, and you described it maybe without knowing it, but truth and with truth is humility. Absolute humility. And I always feel a little strange discussing and describing, talk about humility, because I realize I have so much in me that needs to be humbled.
Well, that's the process.
That's the process. That's a relationship with me. But I do know this, to the degree I am humble and practice humility, I am content, I am close to God, I have healthy relationships, and internally, I'm not double-souled. And a humble person, remember, humility is not thinking lowly of yourself. It's just not thinking of yourself at all. C.S. Lewis gives a great example. He says, a truly humble person could be the world's greatest architect and builder. And he could build the most beautiful, magnificent cathedral on the planet. And then he could look at it and recognize that it is the most beautiful and most grand cathedral in the world.
Right.
And be just as happy looking at it as if someone else had built it.
Right. So there's no self-deprecation and there's no bragging.
No.
It simply means that we occupy the space God has assigned to us.
Yes.
With courage and with confidence and with happiness. And so we are not trying to invade other people's space, and we don't diminish ourselves so that people can invade our space. We
right.
occupy our lives fully.
You know, we on Shabbat, we were discussing with friends, Erev Shabbat, they were here, and we did the blessing over the bread. And the traditional blessing is, blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Mm-hmm. And like you often say, you don't go outside and pick bread from the bread field.
Right.
It's wheat fields.
Yeah.
God doesn't bring forth bread from the earth. He brings forth wheat from the earth. But why do we praise him for bringing forth bread? Because God, in his wisdom, has given us the wisdom and ability to take the wheat he provides, to grind it, to mix it, and sift it.
Do the work.
And do the work.
Do the work.
And do all the things to bake it and make it delicious. But we give him all the praise for that loaf of bread.
Right.
And we're so joyful that he let us participate in some small way.
Yeah.
But we give him the glory for it.
Yeah, it's a relationship.
Exactly.
It goes back to that.
But a person who's not humble, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Bless the Lord our God who brought the wheat from the earth, but I'm the one who made the bread.
Right.
But the humble person says, no, Lord, you made the bread, and you used my hands to help make it.
Or there's the person who says, I don't know enough to make a loaf of bread. I don't have the skill to make the loaf of bread. So the wheat remains wheat.
Yeah. And that's an unhealthy relationship. It's it's just not growing.
Well, you know, it's all about our behavior that we choose.
Yes, it
and
is.
it's easier to change our thoughts and our behavior will come in line than to change our behavior and bring our thoughts in line. I mean,
It
they
is.
both work together.
Yeah.
But I said that backwards. It's easier to change our behavior and then our thoughts come in line. Because I think that when we give in to negative behavior, we literally become alienated from ourselves. There's
Well,
a
you know,
disconnection.
It's easy to get those backwards because I think it can work both ways.
It does work both ways.
You know, when, I don't know how many of our listeners don Fillin, they put phylacteries on in the morning. But when you put Fillin on, there's 3 steps. The first is you put the one Fillin on your upper arm, leaning in towards your heart. Then you put the one on your head. That represents the thoughts.
Okay.
And then the third step is you wrap the arm strap around your hand. Mm-hmm. So it's a picture of the heart, the head, and then the hand. Mm-hmm. Starts in the heart, then you begin to think about your head, and then you do it. But when you're done praying, you take them off. And the order is exactly the opposite.
Interesting.
You start with the hand, and then the head, and then the heart. And sometimes I have to do something before I understand it, and then it goes into my heart. So sometimes it's one way, sometimes it's the other.
I'm sitting here thinking of the woman of valor, how she's described, and she dresses herself with strength and dignity. And there are times when I have to feel that strength and dignity, and I'm able to put that on. But there are other times, Grant, that I don't feel it. I'm not thinking it. But I choose to begin to wear it, and then I begin to experience it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Well, it reminds me of a quote here I have by Rabbi Michael Laitman. He says, just as Adonai draws us closer to himself, so he himself places obstacles on the path to him, so that we would learn to understand our own nature and be able to react to our every thought and desire during our attempts to break free of them. Mm-hmm. So he draws us to himself, but at the same time puts some obstacles there, not impossible ones we can overcome.
Right.
But he puts them there so our desire to draw close to him will make us encounter these obstacles in ourself and overcome them. And he's really intent on us coming close to him, but also becoming people who don't have 2 souls, people who are don't have one part of themselves contrary to another part of themselves, but they're unified within and unified with him. The 2 relationships, my relationship with me, my relationship with him, are on a parallel track.
Well, you know, it's absolutely true that what we allow ourselves or choose to believe about ourselves, it can hold us hostage in a prison that we create. And we can begin to believe that we don't have control over it.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the evening we spent with a friend recently, and she was just sort of bemoaning the fact that she had a hard time approving of herself. And you very sternly reminded her, you know the truth about yourself because God's told you. It's just a matter of believing what he said.
Yeah, well, she was trying to overcome some things and grow, and she's talking about it. I just keep praying and rehearsing who God is and
Right.
remind myself who God is, and I said, I think what you need to start doing is start listening to what God says you are.
Right.
Who does he say you are?
And you know that, you said.
Yeah, and you know what he says, but you need to start believing that.
Right.
And but we grow close to him, and we become more unified in our own hearts at the same time. But when we try to work on one and ignore the other, it's going to be a failure every single time. Always a failure.
I'll tell you, for me, what the temptation is, and I think the enemy, this is a big lie that he speaks, probably not just to me, but to others. I get to the point where I feel disappointed and I get discouraged, and I start to think that it's not worth the trouble to connect to God, to connect to others, and then I feel disconnected to myself. You just believe, you know what? It doesn't matter. I can't do it. It's too much, and it's not worth the effort.
Yeah.
And that is the big lie.
Yes.
Because if we go back to the garden, that's when the big disconnect happened.
That's so true.
And God is calling us back to wholeness and connection
Yes.
and relationship.
Everything in human history is the story of God bringing us back to the garden.
It is.
It is. Well, you know, I want to go back to these obstacles, and somewhere in there, I think you mentioned the word comfort.
Oh.
And
It's so uncomfortable. I don't like confrontation. I don't like conflict. And honestly, Grant, sometimes I avoid it at all costs,
Yes.
even the cost of a relationship.
yes, well, all three of these relationships, with yourself, with others, with God, are, if you're going to grow in any of these, there's going to be discomfort. It's part of the formula. It's unavoidable. It's just what it's going to be. And I recently read in a book, someone, the author said that, and I love this, and I've been quoting it to people. She said that comfort zones make us small.
Wow.
Comfort zones make us small.
Wow.
And when you
Yeah.
think about that, if we just never want to move out of our comfort zone, we will never grow, because anything that's worth pursuing, worth developing, is going to cause some discomfort. You want to get big muscles, you're going to have some sore muscles before they get big.
You're going to have a baby. You're going to bring new life into the
Yes.
world. You're going to have discomfort.
And I know I've gone on this riff before in other teachings, but when someone is asked to do something and their first response is, well, I'm just not comfortable doing that, that tells me everything I need to know about that person. Their God is not Adonai. Their God is their own comfort, and they're going to obey their own comfort. Because our response should never be, well, that makes me uncomfortable, because anything worth doing is going to make you uncomfortable. The first response should be, let me think about it. I want to know what God says about that.
Right.
Is it something that he wants me to do? Is it something worth doing? Is it something I can do? Is it something that he's given me the resources to do? Is he calling me to do this thing?
Is it something I should do?
But comfortable? That should not even be on the radar. Of
Do you
course
think
it's going to be uncomfortable.
Do you think we're worse about this in our Western culture?
I think we are. We're so
We've
spoiled. Life is so
really
easy.
been wrapped in cotton wool in a lot of
We
ways.
have. We have. I know sometimes we'll talk about this younger generation of snowflakes, but if they're snowflakes, because we made them snowflakes.
So it's our
Yeah,
fault
we're just-
to
we-
a great extent.
We are addicted to comfort.
We are.
And to ease. And but if you don't do things that make you feel uncomfortable, well, you're wasting your life.
Well, you think of the big story that that he's given us, Hashem has provided for us, the people who were afraid of discomfort never left Egypt because they preferred slavery to the discomfort and the risk of leaving. And then the first thing that happened when they did come into quote unquote freedom was a great deal of discomfort.
Oh, they're whining all the time.
And they're
about
in the
food.
desert. It's hot, it's dry, it's scary.
But then after a while, the desert became comfortable.
And then
when
when
they
he
come
tried
to the Jordan,
I know.
oh, well, we don't want to do that. That's too difficult.
It's the story of our life.
It is.
It's the story of our life. So let's circle back and apply this to relationship. We need to ask ourselves, what are the relationships that are calling to us and we're resisting, or what have we done in the pursuit of comfort to fall short, Grant, of the quality of relationships that God calls us to, because that is the key to our happiness.
That's true. And sometimes what we do, the enemy is willing to sell us a package of artificial comfort, artificial feelings of achievement instead of the real thing.
Well, look at social media.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm thinking of this quote by Rabbi Aden Steinsaltz, who just died here just a few years ago.
He's so brilliant.
Such a genius of a man. And he says, what does faith offer in return for the struggle and the effort? Because any act of faith, any walk of faith is going to require struggle and effort. So what does faith offer in return for the struggle and the effort? It gives the presence of God, but not always the sense of God's presence.
That's so important.
One has to decide what one really wants, the actual presence of God or the feeling that one is close to him. And I think of so many so-called worship services I've been to, and I want to be careful, not trying to put a blanket condemnation on, but so many times I think that we hire professionals to make us feel we're in the presence of God when we're not. Because sometimes the effort of being in God's presence a real way is something we don't feel it, though we're there. And so what do we want? Do we really want to be close to God? Or we rather just have the feeling of being close to him? Because sometimes one is not always the other.
Well, yesterday, you and I spent some time here during Sabbath listening and watching a teacher that came along at just the right moment. And we learned a lot as he described the gathering of the early believers.
Yes.
And he said something so profound. He said they gathered in small groups.
In homes.
As families, in order to work on the horizontal relationships. Yes. And he said somewhere along the way, we've been told that going to church is showing up and working on the vertical relationship and staying disconnected from everyone around us. He said that is not what God calls his church to be and to do. He wants us to work on encouraging each other, admonishing one another, loving one another, becoming better people.
Exactly right.
Because we can show up in a building and allow someone up front to make a presentation, and like he said, 50 years later, we're the same person.
Yes. No change. Yeah, it was interesting how he came to this realization, what started him down this path of study, and eventually did a doctorate on it. He was teaching in his church through the book of 1 Corinthians, doing a chapter a week. And he came to chapter 14, almost skipped over it because he thought, I just can't find anything relevant here.
Well, he was afraid it would be a little bit controversial.
Because it talks about tongues a lot.
Yeah.
But he came to verse 26, and this changed the trajectory of his life and ministry. This is what verse 26 says, 1 Corinthians 14:26. What is the outcome then, brethren? When you assemble, each one has a psalm, has a teaching, has a revelation, has a tongue, has an interpretation. In other words, each person brings something to share with the rest.
To
because this is
contribute.
taking place in a house community. And then the final phrase in this verse is, let all things be done for edification. In other words, everything you do Do it for the sake of the other people in the room. And he said this thing that was kind of funny, but it's profound. He says, God's doing just fine. We're the ones who need fixed and need work done.
Right.
God doesn't need us there praising him and singing to him. Now, praising and singing to God is wonderful and good.
But even that is for our
But
edification.
we ignore our
Right.
own edification of the others around us because they're so busy in this vertical relationship. God says, get busy pouring into one another's lives.
Right, right.
And that can only be done on a small scale.
And it requires effort. It requires humility, and it
Being
requires love.
vulnerable, being humble, being obedient,
Right.
getting outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, and working through the things that you have to work through in order to improve relationships, like iron sharpening iron. And sometimes there are a few sparks, and it's so
It's okay.
tempting to run away and hide because it's uncomfortable.
uncomfortable.
Right. Well, that's what happens in marriage.
Yeah.
You know, you get uncomfortable, you leave. That should.
Oh.
Or in families, kids get uncomfortable, they walk away from families and friendships. We need to return to what
Yes.
matters.
And working through the discomforts make you stronger. They make all your relationships better. And they bring greater peace. And they make you're edified. You're made a better person.
And I can't help but mention here, there are times, and we've experienced it, when the uncomfortable thing regarding a relationship is a willingness to let go because the other person is just not willing to draw close.
Yes.
And they no longer want
Right.
to be in fellowship with you. So my discomfort is being willing to just let go.
Well, I
But
have to
not with unforgiveness.
share. Right. Well, here's you remind me of a quote I have here. The redeemed community is a community of people who are learning to live the way everyone will live in the future, reconciled in every way. It's a learning process of learning to live now the way we're all going to live later.
Right.
And the things we don't deal with in our lives and our relationships now, we'll have to deal with at the judgment. And I'd rather deal with them now on the small scale on this side and not experience so much shame then when the person that I became confronts the person I could have become. I want to reduce that shame as much as I can. I want to become that person here before I meet my Creator, my
Right.
Savior.
Right. So all of this takes a large degree of humility, of discernment, of willingness to be obedient, and willingness to be vulnerable. Yeah. And those are not qualities that come naturally.
Yeah.
They're supernatural.
Well, I see our time is about gone. So here's something I want you to close out and with any other quotes and thoughts. But I'm thinking here's an activity, an exercise for each one of our listeners to do. I want you to take a moment after you're done here and think about what is your relationship with God? What's it like? What's your relationship with others like? And what is your relationship with yourself like? Ask yourself, which of those is the weakest? Which one do you score the most poorly on? That I want to challenge you and say, then that score is what you have in all the other two areas as well. And so start working. Which is the one that you need to work on? I know for us introverts, working on healthy relationships with others is something maybe we'll work on because we just like being alone. If you're an extrovert, you know what? You still need to work on your relationships because your relationships, you may have a bunch of them, but they're probably pretty shallow.
Or superficial, right?
Yes. So work on having meaningful, deep relationships with the people who are in your circle, in your family, your community, and really make those relationships as healthy as you possibly can.
And we're not saying you need 100 best friends.
No, you can't have 100
No.
best friends.
There
Yeshua
are
only had 12,
and
one of them was a washout.
And only one really stood by him till the
that's
end,
right.
and he called the one he truly loved best or closely.
Yeah, that's so true.
Well, we've said a lot, and we're speaking to each other and to ourselves today.
Yep.
This has been a real conviction for us in these recent weeks,
yeah.
something that we talk about, something that we're working on, and I hope everybody's encouraged. encouraged to go deeper in and further up.
Yes, that's right. And I'm going to close with this quote from Rabbi Akiva Tatz. If you're going to relate to God at all, there can be only one way to do so, on his terms, not yours. And with that, we wish you shalom and may God bless.
Shalom, everyone.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.